What most people misunderstand about a healed empath is that they think healing makes them softer, quieter, easier to deal with. They imagine someone who has finally learned to tolerate more, forgive more, accept more. But the truth is the exact opposite. A healed empath doesn't become more available, they become more selective, they don't lose their sensitivity, they gain control over it. Before healing, an empath feels everything but understands very little about what to do with it. They absorb emotions like a sponge, often confusing other people's pain for their responsibility. They over-explain, over-give, and overstay in places that quietly drain them. Not because they are weak, but because they haven't yet learned the difference between compassion and self-abandonment. But healing changes the direction of that energy. A healed empath starts to notice patterns. They begin to see how often they were the one adjusting, the one fixing, the one carrying emotional weight that was never theirs, and slowly something shifts. They stop reacting instantly. They start observing. They begin to ask themselves one powerful question: is this mine to carry? And that question changes everything. Because once an empath realizes they have a choice, their entire identity transforms. They no longer chase connection at the cost of themselves. They no longer explain their worth to people who benefit from misunderstanding them. They don't shut down emotionally, but they stop being emotionally available to everyone. Their silence becomes intentional. Their presence becomes rare. And their energy becomes protected. A healed empath is not cold. They are precise. They don't love less. They just stop loving blindly. And this is the part most people aren't ready for, because when an empath heals, they stop being easy to access. They stop being predictable. They stop being the person who will always understand, always forgive, always stay. Instead, they become someone who sees clearly, feels deeply, and chooses wisely. The healed empath stops confusing empathy with responsibility, and that shift is deeper than it sounds. Before healing, they feel something and immediately believe they have to do something about it. Someone is upset, and they rush to fix it. Someone is distant, and they assume they caused it. Someone is struggling, and they step in even when no one asked them to. It becomes automatic. Feeling turns into obligation. But over time, this creates a quiet kind of exhaustion, not just physical but emotional, because they are constantly carrying things that don't belong to them. They start living other people's emotions as if they were their own, without ever questioning where the boundaries should be. And the hardest part is, it often feels like the right thing to do. It feels like kindness. It feels like love. Healing interrupts that pattern. A healed empath begins to separate feeling from taking action. They can sit with someone's pain without immediately trying to solve it. They can recognize sadness, anger, or confusion in others and not make it their personal responsibility to fix it. This doesn't mean they stop caring. It means they stop overextending themselves in the name of caring. They learn that empathy is the ability to understand and feel, not the duty to carry and repair. That difference changes how they show up in every relationship. Instead of asking, "How do I fix this?" they start asking, "Is this mine to fix?" And many times the honest answer is no. They also begin to notice how often their sense of responsibility was tied to fear, fear of being seen as uncaring, fear of losing connection, fear of disappointing others, so they would step in even when it cost them their peace, even when it slowly drained them. But healing brings awareness to that pattern, and with awareness comes choice. Now they can care without collapsing into someone else's emotions. They can support without sacrificing themselves. They can listen without absorbing everything, and that balance creates a different kind of strength, one that is steady, not overwhelming. People around them might not understand this change at first. Some might even feel the difference and call it distance. But it's not distance, it's clarity. It's finally knowing where they end and where someone else begins. And once an empath learns that they are not responsible for everyone they feel, they stop living in a constant state of emotional urgency. They slow down. They choose where their energy goes. They stop reacting to every emotion like it's an emergency that needs their attention. Because the truth is, not everything they feel is theirs to carry. And once that truth settles in, they stop trying to save everyone and finally start saving themselves. They develop emotional boundaries without losing depth. And that's where their real power begins to show. Before healing, boundaries feel unnatural to an empath. saying no feels like rejection. Pulling back feels like hurting someone, so instead of protecting themselves, they stretch, they adjust. They let things slide that don't sit right with them just to keep the peace, but that peace is never real. It's fragile. It comes at the cost of their own comfort, their own truth. And over time, it builds quiet resentment, not always toward others, but toward themselves. Because deep down, they know they're allowing things that don't align with who they are. Healing changes. A healed empath realizes that boundaries are not walls to keep people out. They are lines that define where respect begins. And for the first time, they stop seeing boundaries as something negative. They start seeing them as necessary. They begin to notice what drains them, what feels off, what leaves them feeling heavy after interactions. And instead of ignoring those signals, they listen. They trust that discomfort is information, not something to suppress. So they start small. They speak up when something doesn't feel right. They take space when they need it. They stop over-explaining themselves to people who don't truly listen. And slowly, they build a new relationship with their own needs. What's important is they don't lose their emotional depth in the process. They still feel deeply. They still care. They still understand people on a level that most don't, but now that depth is grounded. It's not scattered everywhere. It's directed with awareness. They no longer give the same level of access to everyone. They understand that not everyone deserves their full emotional availability. And that realization isn't rooted in ego. It's rooted in self-respect. Some people will struggle with this version of them, especially those who were used to having unlimited access. Those who benefited from the empath's lack of boundaries might call this change selfish or distant. But a healed empath sees through that. They no longer confuse someone else's comfort with their responsibility. They also learn that saying no doesn't make them a bad person. Taking space doesn't make them cold. Protecting their energy doesn't make them difficult. It makes them balanced, and that balance allows their relationships to become healthier, more honest, more equal. Because now they're not showing up from a place of depletion, they're showing up from a place of choice. They give because they want to, not because they feel they have to. They stay because it feels right, not because they fear leaving. And that shift changes the entire dynamic of how they connect with others. A healed empath doesn't become less loving. They become more intentional with their love. They stop pouring into places that can't hold them. They stop shrinking to maintain connection, because they finally understand that real connection doesn't require them to disappear. They become observers instead of immediate responders. And that shift brings a kind of calm they never had before. Healing, everything feels urgent. Every emotion they pick up, every shift in someone's tone, every silence, it all demands a reaction. They don't pause to understand it. They react to it. They jump in, trying to smooth things over, fix the mood, or prevent conflict before it even fully forms. It happens so fast, they don't even realize it's a pattern. Feeling leads to action without space in between. And that space is exactly what was missing, because when there is no pause, there is no clarity. A healed empath learns to slow that process down. They feel the same things, sometimes even more clearly than before, but they don't rush to respond. They sit with it. They watch it. They allow emotions to exist without immediately trying to change them. That pause becomes powerful. Instead of assuming, they observe. Instead of reacting, they reflect. They notice not just what someone is feeling, but how that feeling is being expressed, where it might be coming from, and whether it actually involves them at all. And many times they realize it doesn't. This is where their awareness deepens. They start to see patterns they used to miss. They notice when someone is projecting their own frustration. They recognize when silence isn't about them, but about something internal the other person is dealing with. They see the difference between genuine connection and emotional dependency. And because they're not reacting instantly, they stop feeding into cycles that used to drain them. They also become more grounded in their own emotional state. Instead of being pulled in different directions by every external energy, they stay centered. They can feel something without becoming it. They can witness someone else's storm without getting lost inside it. That doesn't make them distant. It makes them aware. And awareness changes how they respond. When they do choose to speak or act, it comes from a place of understanding, not impulse. Their words become more measured. Their presence becomes more stable. They stop escalating situations and start diffusing them simply by not reacting the way they used to. People begin to notice this difference. There's a quiet strength in someone who doesn't react immediately. It creates space, not just for the empath, but for others too. Space to think, to process, to take responsibility for their own emotions. Because a healed empath no longer rushes in to carry what isn't theirs. They understand that not every emotion needs their response, not every situation needs their involvement, and not every silence needs to be filled. They become comfortable with letting things unfold without interfering. And in that stillness, they gain something they never had before: control over their own energy. Because when you stop reacting to everything, you start choosing what truly deserves your response. Their validation comes from within, not from being needed. And that changes the foundation of who they are. Before healing, feeling. Needed feels like proof of worth. If someone depends on them, if someone opens up to them, if someone leans on them, emotionally it gives them a sense of purpose. It makes them feel important, valued, seen. But that kind of validation is fragile because it depends on other people's needs, and those needs can change at any time. When someone pulls away, becomes distant, or no longer relies on them the same way, it creates confusion. It feels like something is missing. They start questioning themselves. Did I do something wrong? Am I not enough anymore? That's where the pattern quietly traps them. They keep giving, not always because they want to, but because they're trying to hold on to that feeling of being needed. They become the listener, the fixer, the safe place for everyone else, while slowly losing connection with their own sense of self. Healing breaks that cycle. A healed empath begins to understand that being needed is not the same as being valued. And more importantly, it's not the same as valuing yourself. They stop measuring their worth by how much they can do for others or how much others rely on them. Instead, they start building something internal. They begin to recognize their own emotions without needing someone else to confirm them. They trust their own thoughts, their own decisions, their own boundaries. They don't need constant reassurance to feel secure in who they are. This doesn't happen overnight. It's a process of slowly turning inward, of learning to sit with themselves without distraction, without external approval. At first, it can feel unfamiliar, even uncomfortable, because they're no longer chasing that external validation they were used to. But over time, something steadier replaces it. They start to feel a quiet confidence. Not loud, not performative, but real. The kind that doesn't need to be seen by everyone. The kind that doesn't disappear when someone else changes their behavior. They also become more aware of the difference between genuine connection and dependency. They no longer confuse someone needing them with someone truly respecting and valuing them. And because of that, they stop overextending themselves just to feel important in someone else's life. Now, when they give, it comes from a place of fullness, not lack. They're not trying to earn their place. They already know they have one. This shift also changes how they handle distance. If someone pulls away, they don't immediately chase. They don't collapse into self-doubt. They allow space. They trust that their worth is not tied to someone else's presence, and that makes their energy different. It's no longer heavy with the need to be validated. It's steady, grounded, and self-sustained. People can feel that difference. It creates respect, even if it creates distance from those who only valued them for what they provided. Because a healed empath doesn't need to be needed to feel worthy. They've already given that validation to themselves. They choose peace over connection when the two conflict, and that is the decision that changes everything. Before healing, connection feels like something they can't afford to lose. Even when it's draining, even when it's one-sided, even when it quietly hurts them, they hold on. They convince themselves that staying is the right thing, that understanding more will fix it, that giving a little more will balance it. But deep down, there's always a cost. Their peace starts to slip. Their mind feels crowded. Their energy feels heavy after certain conversations, certain people, certain environments, and yet they stay. Not because it feels right, but because letting go feels harder. Healing forces a different kind of honesty. A healed empath starts to notice that not every connection is meant to be maintained. Some are built on imbalance. Some survive only because one person keeps adjusting. And for the first time, they stop asking, how do I keep this? And start asking, what is this costing me? That question changes their choices. They begin to understand that peace is not something extra. It's not a luxury. It's a baseline. And anything that consistently disrupts it, no matter how familiar or emotionally charged, has to be reevaluated. So when there's a conflict between keeping a connection and protecting their inner calm, they don't automatically choose the connection anymore. They pause, they feel. They look at the pattern, not just the moment. If something repeatedly leaves them anxious, drained, or unsettled, they don't ignore it like they used to. They don't keep explaining themselves, hoping the other person will finally understand. They don't keep trying to fix something that only works when they're the one compromising. Instead, they step back, and that step back is not weakness, it's clarity. They realize that real connection doesn't require them to lose themselves. It doesn't demand constant emotional labor just to keep it alive. It doesn't make them feel like they have to choose between being understood and being at peace. So if a relationship, a conversation, or even a dynamic starts to take more than it gives, they no longer fight to hold on to it. They release it even if it's difficult, even if it's quiet, even if no one else fully understands why, because they've learned something most people avoid facing. Not every connection is worth the cost of your peace, and choosing peace doesn't mean they've stopped caring. It means they've started respecting themselves enough to walk away from what disrupts their inner stability. That's where their strength becomes undeniable. They no longer stay out of habit. They no longer hold on out of fear. They choose what aligns, and they let go of what doesn't without needing to justify it to anyone. Because at the end of the day, a healed empath understands one simple truth: peace is not something they find in people, it's something they refuse to lose for them.